Hello, WNBA and Sparks fans. Welcome back to Sparks 365 Network, and this is weird. Doing this network live, and Callan's not even here. I'm just, it's just weird, and uh, a great day so far. I'm here, just hanging, and just uh, and the Sunday, my birthday. Got a haircut, and it was a great game. Sparks win on Tuesday night over the Phoenix Mercury. Just a great win for the Sparks, but came up short on Wednesday night against the New York Liberty. Just weird doing this network when Callan's not here. Just and also just hanging here, and also follow us on Twitter. You can follow it's at LA Sparks 365. Follow myself, it's at LA Sparks Fan 30. Following Callan on Twitter, it's at 3. That is CLLAN Mac with the number 3. And just hanging here. Just weird. Like I said, doing this network. And now the Sparks terrible first half of the season going into the All-Star break. But the Sparks get to the half on a great note since got word official from the LA Sparks that Dennis Parker will be back July. That music, I think it might be like
lights, magic sparks, and you might come pass across the 6'4" chick flinging all vice spots with a shot. You thought that's Candace Park. She may be a lady, Katie, past the crazy cool ass lady. No better than Vinny. She driving like a dime in the phone. She take risks. WNBA sparking, loving the best 'cause they all so hard. Tonight we going hard. We light it up in the dark. In back-to-back titles, our rubbers we toss them. You know what it is 'cause Lindsay got diamonds for pennies. The first one to go so hard.
oh,
Tonight we going hard. Tonight we going hard.
Yo, 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 what is up, everybody? Yes, that was a little bit of a little joke for you folks. I am back home in one piece from downtown Los Angeles, California. Callum McClurg is back with you folks from Studio 171 in San Diego after a couple days up in Los Angeles. And a huge thank you to my main swingman host, Chris Mancy, for doing that little sketch that we planned earlier in the day for you folks out there. Chris held his own, but with that, folks, officially welcome into the LA Sparks 365 Network, your 24/7 365 comprehensive home for the WNBA and your two-time WNBA champion Los Angeles Sparks on the first day of the 2015 WNBA All-Star break. This is WNBA 365 All-Star Central. Of course, you saw him earlier a few moments ago. Chris Mancy, your fill-in host for about 3 minutes. But, of course, we're back with you folks here in San Diego. Of course, Chris will get to the game and everything that happened with me personally last night on our next show, the guys with the petition coming up at 10:30 this evening. Chris, the bigger story, though, folks, out of the WNBA, not my vacation to LA, not seeing one of my favorite players last night, and we'll get to that later, as we said, folks. But, Chris, the bigger story, though, Chris, confirmed today, not the Sparks getting Candace Parker back, but, of course, Chris, the shocking news, quite literally, that the WNBA owners have unanimously approved the relocation of the Tulsa Shock to the Dallas-Fort Worth metropolitan area. The team will finish its current season in Tulsa before beginning play in Arlington, Texas in 2016. WNBA President Laurel J. Ritchie had the following statement to say. She says, quote, the WNBA is extremely grateful to the city of Tulsa and the team's loyal fans. The support they have shown the Shock and women's pro basketball over the past 6 seasons has been tremendous. We look forward to having our first team based in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, close quote. The fourth largest metro area in the U.S., Dallas-Fort Worth represents a well-established professional sports market with one of the top 5 national media markets. The Shock will play their games at the College Park Center on the campus of the University of Texas at Arlington, subject to approval by the University of Texas Systems Board of Regents. Additional information about the team will be forthcoming. Now, Chris, sadly, man, this is not the team news you were kind of hoping for with what you'd seen from the league the past 3 seasons, of course, with the record growth that's been shown, by fans, casual fans, male fans, first-time fans, Chris, that you knew that once they kind of got that revenue up and they started getting attention, Chris, that, okay, maybe you start easing your way back towards league re-expansion where, Chris, this, I think, just does not help. I mean, I know that the Shock aren't folding, but, Chris, we said, man, it's relocating a team, Chris, that's already moved once in their franchise history from Detroit to Tulsa, now Tulsa to Arlington. Chris, in your mind, man, okay, obviously the Shock, Chris, great season, so obviously, a good way for them to kind of go off in the sunset with that, with their good season so far. But, Chris, in your mind, though, man, good or bad for the league, though, going forward with the Shock relocating to Dallas, in your mind, what do you think and why?
I think probably maybe good, since we have a great established media market in Dallas.
Yeah, Chris, also I think, though, too, that this is something that I've talked about and I've kind of thrown back and forth the past few nights when I thought about the story, when I was reading it, and, of course, being up in my 11-story hotel room in L.A., Chris, was when I read the story was, obviously, Tulsa and Oklahoma, Chris, for that matter, not really known for pro sports. Maybe some minor league teams, a few knockoff pro teams like the Shock, like their indoor soccer club, the Tulsa Revolution, Chris. But other than that, man, not a lot other than the OKC Thunder and the NBA, and that's about it. Nothing else across the board in any other sports. But, Chris, you're going to Dallas, man. You've got a lot of teams that you can market yourself to, between the Dallas Stars of the NHL, the Mavericks, of course. I thought initially when I heard the story, Chris, I'm sure a lot of people did, was Mark Cuban involved in this in any small fashion? Will they have gone to the American Airlines Center and played there where the Mavs do play? Obviously, Chris, that's not going to happen. It's going to be a college campus venue. Where, Chris, seeing that college venue, Chris, reminded me vaguely of Sparks Watch last year, where there's talk about the Sparks, going to play at Galen Center at USC or the Pauley Pavilion at UCLA, Chris, or, some college campus, LA Southwest, for all that I know, Chris. A lot of options were on the table for the Sparks going forward, in the last part of that watch, where now, Chris, you're going to see a pro team playing at a college venue. Chris, in your mind, man, is it a bit different that you're going to see a professional sports team, regardless of sport, Chris, a pro sports team playing at a college venue? Is that going to be different, Chris, going forward, and why? All right, so we got a bit of a delay there, folks. Again, as I kind of hopped in here as quickly as I could, so we'll let Chris kind of reconnect here. But again, I think though that in the long run, folks, it's gonna be different. I think it'll be a bit different to see a pro sports team playing at a pro venue. Or a pro team playing at a college venue is what I should say. Let's see here, Chris. Okay, it looks like you're back, man. I'll re-ask the question one more time, Chris. Different in your mind. that you see a pro team playing at a college venue, Chris? Is it going to be different for you next year to see that, and why do you think too?
I think probably weird that they're playing at a college campus.
Yeah, I think everyone, Chris, and like I said, though, I mean, I think everyone kind of thought initially, perhaps Mark Cuban was going to be involved. Highly doubtful. Of course, he's not a part of this ownership change, it sounds like, Chris, where the team is relocating to Tulsa. But again, folks, other than the All-Star game and my 2 days in L.A., the bigger story, though, again, folks, WNBA approving the relocation of the Shock from Tulsa, Oklahoma, to the Dallas-Fort Worth area beginning in the 2016 season. With that, folks, with the All-Star game coming up on Saturday night, or Saturday afternoon, I should say. Again, the All-Star game going to be held on Saturday at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific, live on ABC. Again, to reiterate, here's your starting lineups for the 2015 WNBA All-Star game, beginning with the Eastern Conference All-Stars: Elena Del Don from Chicago, Shoni Schimmel from Atlanta, Tamia Catchings from Indiana, Tina Charles from New York, and Angel McCoughtry from Atlanta. On the Western Conference side of the story, Skylar Diggins from Tulsa, Simone Augustus from Minnesota, Maya Moore also from Minnesota, Brittany Griner from Phoenix, and Candace Dupree from Phoenix as well. And of course, folks, we should iterate 3 injuries for the Western Conference All-Stars: Skylar Diggins, Simone Augustus, and Lindsay Whalen all axed off the roster due to injuries. They've been replaced on the rosters by the next players we'll get to, which of course is the upcoming, which of course now is the 2015 Boost Mobile WNBA All-Star reserves for both sides of the story. We'll get to those right now. The All-Stars for the Eastern Conference will go as follows: Alex Bentley and Kelsey Bone from Connecticut, Marissa Coleman from Indiana, Stephanie Dolson from Washington, along with her teammate Emma Mieseman, Cappie Pondexter from Chicago round out the East. For the West, Sue Bird from Seattle, Dewana Bonner from Phoenix, and from the Sparks, Nneka Ogwumike and Janta Lavender, Plina Pearson coming from Tulsa, and Danielle Robinson also coming in as well, and of course Lindsay Whalen also being named as well, but also was replaced by Kayla McBride because of an injury sustained during the last game that they played. Also named as well Janta Lavender, of course, from LA, and also Requana Williams, also named a reserve for the Western Conference. With that, Chris, all right, let's kind of go in the DeLorean, Chris, and go back 48 hours to Tuesday night, Chris, where the Sparks took on their longtime rivals once more again, Chris, the Sparks and Mercury hooking up again from the Staples Center in downtown L.A. And, Chris, probably, man, a game, other than the fact, Chris, it was my first win, probably, Chris, a game a lot of people are saying is the signature win of the season. Of course, Chris, coming off of a rugged, very tough last few games for the Sparks, of course, with those tough games that they had played, of course, over the past couple of days. But, of course, Chris, the Sparks get a big win, probably, Chris, their signature win of the season, their trademark win, beating Phoenix at home to snap a pretty lengthy 7-game losing streak to Phoenix, plus the playoffs. The Sparks win 70-65 over the Merc at Staples Center on Tuesday night. Final line score for Phoenix: 14 in the first, 21 in the second, 17 in the third, and 13 in the fourth, with a game total of 65. For Los Angeles, 21 in the first, 17 in the second, 16 in the third, and 16 more in the fourth, for the game total of 70 points. For the Mercury, Dewana Bonner, 15 points, Brittany Griner, 7 rebounds, and 2 players tied with 3 assists. For the Sparks, Jantel Lavender, player of the game, 19 and 11, and 2 players with 4 assists in that ball game. And of course, Chris, me being there, of course, Chris, in spite of the losses I saw, man, and those were all great games, but Chris, finally, man, you saw some things click the right way for LA on Tuesday, because Chris, you saw a complete team effort, and Chris, pretty much, man, what you saw was a continuation of Game 1 that went to OT a few weeks ago on July 5th, Chris, where the Merc came out 94-91. But Chris, what though in your mind though? I mean, because you know that we saw Phoenix a few weeks ago, Sparks lose an OT, Chris. What looked different though, as opposed to that game back on July 5th, as opposed to now a few weeks later back at Staples, where the Sparks, Chris, made some adjustments, clamped down, and won that game by 5 at home on Tuesday? What do you think? All right. So again, Chris stuck in a deep freeze, but again, folks, again, great being there on Tuesday. But of course, folks, I mean, I'll just state my case here real quick. Is I think that as you look at this game on Tuesday, you know that you want some type of momentum going forward into the All-Star break, and of course, you're playing a team that has owned you the past games. I mean, if you folks remember well, if you were to include both Game 3 of the 2013 conference semifinal playoff game, plus the regular season and the games in the playoffs last year, the Sparks had lost 9 straight games. They had lost, Game 3 at home in 2013, lost the 6 regular season matchups, plus the 2 there, so technically they lost 8 straight games before beating Phoenix, on Tuesday night in this ball game. And of course, Gentle Lavender 19 and 11. Nneka Ogwumike also had 17. The Sparks snapped a 5-game skid. Of course, their season long was 7 straight losses. Now, Chris, in your mind, man, as you think about this, obviously, man, a lot of things up for the Sparks, Chris. Specifically, man, later in the ball game, not 1 through 3, Chris. Later in the ball game, Chris, when the pressure was on, when the Mercury, Chris, had gone ahead for a bit, the Sparks got back, Chris. I think that the bigger plays in the game were the 3 huge three-pointers that the Sparks made in the final crunch time of the game on Tuesday, which, of course, Chris, was Anna Dubovich with a nice little play, KT making a huge 3, and also a few other things as well with that huge 3. With those 3 three-pointers, Chris, so in your mind, man, as you look back, Chris, turning point of the game, Chris, is it the 3-pointers or is it something that stood out other than those 3-pointers in your mind, and why? All right, so what has started out as a joke has turned out, folks, to be a disaster. Again, we're trying to see if, that with Chris's internet, of course, not giving him time of day again, as we've mentioned over the past times here, folks. But again, let me throw it to you folks out there on Twitter. Of course, you guys are out there watching us, of course, at LA Sparks, at LA Sparks 365, or at Calamac3, or at LA Sparks Fan 30. I think that we can all sort of agree that I think that when you see that Phoenix is making this big run, coming back, late in the game, early in the game, of course, the Sparks had built that 24-17 lead or 21-14 lead after the first quarter. The Mercury kind of got back in the game after the second, and then I think, though, that, through 3 and 4 up, the Sparks got back, got their rhythm back, going forward in this contest. And again, folks, we're trying to make sure that we can get Chris back in here again. We've been experiencing some minor flaws here from his side of the story, but again, that's nothing new here, of course. But now that we do have Chris back here again via the Apple FaceTime app, Chris, I think, man, that as you look at the whole story, Chris, again, the Sparks had lost 9 in a row, 8 in a row, 8 or 9 in a row, Chris, against Phoenix, dating back to 2013, losing Game 3 at home in very heartbreaking fashion, and, of course, getting swept in the regular season and, of course, in the playoffs, Chris. I know that I threw out the 3-pointers that were made, Chris, late in the stretch, Chris, between Tamika Johnson, between Chrissy Tolliver, and Dubovich also having a huge shot there. Now, Chris, you mind, though, man, what went right for this game as opposed to that overtime game where the Sparks dropped that game by 3 a few weeks ago? Chris, what went right this time for the Sparks later in that ball game? What do you think?
At times, and they just cranked on defense again. Brittany Griner.
Chris, that's another big talking point as well, was that you were able to clamp down on Brittany Griner, Chris, again, where BG, Chris, by the way, folks, she went 4 for 14 on the ball game today, or on Tuesday. So, of course, Chris, it looked like, though, that the Sparks really, they sent different defensive schemes at the Merc towards the end, Chris, but also what it was that the Mercury, Chris, had trouble defending the Sparks pick and roll on Tuesday. I mean, they got killed basically in that third and fourth quarter. Also the fourth quarter by the Sparks using the pick and roll to their advantage on Tuesday night. So, of course, Chris, I think that, I think, Chris, it's more so I think we all agree here, folks, that, you can say it was the defense maybe, but Chris, this was an all-around complete team effort, plus the defensive help, and of course also the three-pointers. And of course, Chris, we go from a good note, Chris, to unfortunately the bad note, which of course was the Sparks dropping the game last night to the New York Liberty at home by the final score of 59-53, a very low-scoring affair at Staples last night. The Liberty with the win now go to 12-5, a 5-game win streak for the Libs, and for the Sparks now 3-13, 3-6 at home this season. For New York in the ballgame, all even Steven after one quarter of play, 14 for both teams in the first quarter. For New York, though, afterwards, 17 in the second, 8 in the third, and 20 in the fourth for the game total of 59. For Los Angeles, 14 in the first quarter, 10 in the second, 11 in the third, and 18 in the fourth for the game total of 53. Leading scorer for New York, Tina Charles with 14 points in the ballgame. And for the Sparks last night, Chrissy Tolliver with 16 points. Very quiet, 16 points in the ballgame. Now, Chris, I was making a wager with my pal Chris Davis last night that it would be lucky, Chris, if either team broke 50. They were lucky to break 50 last night for that game. Now, Chris, obviously, man, you can probably contribute the loss, perhaps, to both teams coming off a back-to-back. Of course, the game last night, very, very sluggish last night in that game. Of course, both teams on those back-to-backs. So, Chris, in your mind, man, we go from talking about a great game, Chris, to a bad game. So, in your mind, Chris, in this case, what went wrong for the Sparks in this game when they dropped the game to the Libs by 6? What do you think and why?
I think probably they were just coming off a great win against the Phoenix Mercury, and I think they were maybe just too hyped and just weren't ready.
Chris, I think that I would agree, and I've been on both sides of this coin, folks. As a player, you go from such a high point of beating a team that you've had problems with or whatever it is, folks. When you're the underdog and you do pull that upset, you do beat the best team in your league, your conference, or division, whatnot. You go from such a high point to such a low point very quickly. And Chris, I think that's what we can kind of say here was, you go from winning probably, Chris, the biggest win of the entire season on Tuesday, and and of course, Chris, that 8 o'clock start time didn't help, of course, with the game being on national television, and then you got to come back, X amount of hours later, come back and play, a very hot team in New York, Chris, who have a time of won 4 straight games, and then of course coming out there and seeing that. But again, folks, Sparks on Tuesday defeat the Mercury 59-53. Sparks last night, or check that, folks, the Sparks beat the Mercury on Tuesday 70-65. They lose to the Liberty last night by 6, 59-53. No games to report, folks, until Saturday when the Stars collide up in Utica, Connecticut, folks. The 2015 Boost Mobile WNBA All-Star Game tips off at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific on ABC. The West versus the East. Now, Chris, we saw a thrilling All-Star Game last year down there in the desert, Chris, where the game had gone to overtime last year, and of course, Chris, Shoni Schimmel taking home the, of course, going, seeing a great game last year. One quick tweet, folks, from one of our great viewers, from Eric up there in Chicago. Eric on Twitter says the Sparks will match up well versus NYL. Pick and roll wasn't nearly as effective with Stokes on the floor. Eric agreed 100%, man. When you're sitting 7 rows back from the floor, you see a lot of things, and obviously Kia Stokes, my early vote for first half and perhaps season Rookie of the Year. So thanks to Eric, one of our great Chicago Sky fans out there, for chiming in on tonight's program. So, Chris, let's look at, Chris, to the All-Star Game on Saturday. Now, of course, Chris, we know that the voting went off, of course, again on Facebook, Twitter, and IG again to get those players of the All-Star Game. Chris, in your mind, man, you've seen 2 games so far, 2013, 2014, Chris. What are your expectations for this All-Star Game on Saturday in Connecticut, and why?
I think it should be a very great All-Star Game this Saturday, and it should be a great game between the West and the East.
So again, folks, the Stars collide on Saturday afternoon again. West versus East, 2015 Boost Mobile WNBA All-Star Game. from the Mohegan Sun Arena in Utica, Sayville, Connecticut. Tip-off again at 12:30 Pacific, 3:30 Eastern. The game can be seen live and in full on ABC. All right, Chris, we got 5 minutes left here in our program. Now, Chris, to the other big news for the Sparks, of course, Chris. Coming back on July 29th, 2015, the Dark Knight rises again in Los Angeles again, of course, Chris. The Ace of Spades, LA's original CP3, whatever you call her, folks. Candace Parker coming back to the Sparks on next week. Again, July 29th is our first game, again, when the Sparks take on the Minnesota Lynx in Minneapolis on July 29th. Again, tip-off at 5 o'clock on TWCSN. And, of course, Chris, obviously, man, you knew the season would be a struggle without seeing Ace on the floor. And, of course, Chris, she had that release, that press release, Chris, when she was on Nickelodeon last week. Again, she had that article posted, of course, that interview that Nick Hamilton did with her. Again, Chris, clearly, Chris, saying, look, this was a personal decision, was not about business, about the money, or about anything, Chris. It was a personal decision for me to, miss the first half of the year, give me a break for playing, 8 long years, for playing those 8 straight years overseas, Chris. And of course, Chris, the break well deserved, Chris. But of course, Chris, Chris, when when I told you that news about her sitting out, Chris, where were where did you put your expectations for the Sparks, Chris, when I told you that Park would be sitting out the first half of the season, Chris? Be honest with me. Where were they and why?
Like what?
Where were your expectations when I told you that Parker was going to be out for the first half of the season? After I told you that, because of course, Chris, I know that everyone, Chris, says every team has a shot to win the championship, Chris, and of course everyone does until you fall flat on your face. But Chris, in your mind though, man, when I told you that Parker would be out for at least the first half of the season, Chris, where did your expectations go for the season from the high point to where they are now? What do you think and why?
Like that, I know the Sparks are going to struggle out of the gate since pretty much the puzzle pieces are out of the lineup, and would have been a struggle out of the game, and not surprising.
Chris, I talked to Alan Luong last night. He met me at the team store during halftime yesterday, and he had asked my opinion, about this whole thing, and I told him specifically, and I'm sure you folks have probably heard me say this, who knows how many times on the network, was that, is as much as the fans have piled on Parker this entire season so far, I think we all knew. You knew well, I knew well for sure. I know Chris did, but I know that you all knew well, though. In spite of you piling on Candace Parker over this whole situation, folks, you knew it was going to be a struggle, whether you wanted to admit it or not, that you knew it was going to be a struggle for the Sparks going forward without having their franchise player going forward this season. So I think, though, that now, Chris, okay, now she's coming back, Chris. Yes, it will take a few games for her to come back in the flow of things, Chris, but hey, you give her time, and then Chris, if you give her time, she'll be coming back to being that MVP candidate that she's been for her entire career. One quick tweet from Philly Kid 215 at Rambod68. They say, the difference maker in the New York game was the offensive rebounds, which led to a lot of second chance points for New York, and I agree 100% with Philly Kid, because, Chris, at one point, man, the Liberty had 50 rebounds combined in the ballgame, Chris. They out-rebounded LA offensively. I want to say, Chris, between 35 to 40 to 20 offensive rebounds, Chris. So man, that the Sparks were very late getting to those rebounds and stuff, and that the bigger bodies with the Liberty, like Charles, like Stokes, getting to those balls last night, and of course, made things a bit difficult for the Sparks last night. But again, folks, Sparks beat Phoenix on Tuesday, drop a tough one to the Liberty last night. Sparks back in action. Candace Parker's return to the team July 29th, next Wednesday at 5 o'clock from Minnesota on Time Warner Cable Sportsnet. With that, folks, we'll take a quick break. When we do come back, we'll bring back either the 1.5 or 2-man show of record, TGWDP, to come back with you folks at 10:30 to recap what was nights 2 and 3 of the LAS 365 hosts meet and greet night, with a pretty awesome story to tell involving one player from the New York Liberty. We'll take a break, folks, and come back right after this. So please do not go away. More to come after this.